Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. This is your source of answers to questions about building companies, starting companies, and the meaning of life. All of the panelists here will answer questions submitted by you or people just like you. And we all have experience doing exactly what you're doing today. Starting companies, building them, buying them, raising money, selling them, all those sorts of fun things. I am Sean Burns. I've been a founder for about 20 years of companies like Flurry and Outlier.ai. I've coached countless founders, invested in many more. And these days, I like to give back to the community by sharing all those hard-earned lessons from my career, the mistakes I've made, so hopefully you can avoid making them yourself. I'm joined by two illustrious founders who are successful as well, Ash and Nick.
Hi, everybody. My name's Ash Rust, and I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. I mostly invest in B2B companies based in the United States, UK, and Canada through my fund Sterling Road. I've also worked at places like Trinity Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence and Bullpen Capital as an advisor. Before investing, I was an entrepreneur myself, most notably an early employee at the social media analysis company Clout, as well as the CEO and co-founder of SendHub. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders and have helped more than 1,000 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I am co-founder and CEO of a startup called Navi. Navi is the gateway to the innovation economy. We build tools that help folks learn innovation skills, solve mission-critical problems, and start companies. This is my second startup. Over the years, I've had a chance to support hundreds of innovators and startups. I have an absolute blast doing it. And these episodes are always so much fun. I can't wait to get back into it.
And unfortunately, you're all stuck with the rest of us as we answer these questions. So Nick, buckle up for this ride. Today, we're answering questions about happy employees, or rather how to make your employees happy, or how do you even know if your employees are happy in the first place? So all our questions today were submitted by people in the audience, founders, CEOs, and business leaders who wanted to answer questions about employees. And if you have questions that you'd like us to answer in future episodes, we would love to hear them. You can submit them on our website, thestartuphelpdesk.com, or on Twitter, we're thestartuphd. So either thestartuphd on Twitter or thestartuphelpdesk.com on our website. We would love to answer your questions in a future episode. But let's jump into it. Ash and Nick, our first question about employees being happy is, how do you measure employee engagement and satisfaction? This is a great question. I'm actually really looking forward to learning from you guys about how exactly do you measure employee engagement and satisfaction? Ash, what do you think?
Crystal balls, mostly.
It's a good place to start.
Right, exactly. Mine's in the shop, so let's talk about some of the tactics. I know, Nick, you want to talk about surveys, and you've got a lot of feedback on surveys, so I'm not going to say too much about that, but the main thing that I would say about surveys is volume of responses is much more important than quality of responses, so don't ask for a novel, just try and get a rating out of 10. Outside of surveys, which are the obvious mechanisms to try and understand employee satisfaction, engagement, I like to measure that by things like event attendance. So are people asking for events when the company events do happen? Are people attending those events? Perhaps there are subsets of employees who are organizing their own events like ERGs. Are those well attended? Retention numbers. So are we losing lots of people versus the number of people that we're able to hire? What is that ratio offset by? And what is the time period that you're losing these people over? You know, are people leaving immediately? Are they leaving after 2 or 3 years? Those kinds of things. And then manager perception. So obviously your middle managers are in the one-on-ones the most. So what do they think is going on in those one-on-ones and with their teams overall? So those are the mechanisms I would look at in terms of measuring employee engagement and satisfaction. But I wouldn't say there's one particular core metric that has been accepted as the measurement of employee satisfaction as far as I know.
Ash, a quick follow-up question. Different companies have different ideas, and you could argue that a lot of people have, never really loved the companies they worked at. What do you think is a realistic expectation on satisfaction from employees? Should they love what you're doing? Should they be happy that this is better than the other jobs that they had? Or what does success in employee satisfaction look like?
Well, if you're thinking about the profit and loss element of it, the vast majority of the cost of an employee comes from recruitment, right? So if you lose somebody and have to hire somebody else, that's going to be really, really expensive. So the first area to look at when it comes to success is what people's behavior is, and that's in terms of retention, staying in the job. And if you see that change for the worse, then you really need to look at what's going on those teams and overall with your employee culture. I think that the other things to look at where you see success really manifest is referrals for new hires. So again, it goes back to HR. If you see your employees are referring great candidates that are becoming employees of yours as well, then that's a good indication of satisfaction too.
Fair enough. Nick, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I love that. Well, first, just thinking about that question about what does success look like when it comes to employee engagement and satisfaction, I think about it in three ways. Part of it is recruitment success, and I know Ash touched on this as well. Big picture, if you're hiring well, it's a good sign. Second piece of this is retention. If you're hiring well and keeping great talent, it's a great sign. And then the third outcome from successful employee engagement and satisfaction is the business working? So are you continuing to achieve new milestones and grow as a startup? And so all of that is to say, what that means is measuring employee engagement and satisfaction is complex. And so one of the themes that we saw from how Ash was describing it is that if we were to put an umbrella around all these various ways to measure something, what we're really looking for in terms of how do we measure it is to listen. It's so important to just understand and listen and really think about it from the perspective of almost the user interviews when you're doing the design thinking as a founder. You're listening to understand, you're listening for pain, you're trying to ultimately just listen to the pulse of the company. And so the theme here is it's very difficult. So you have to design intentional ways to listen.
I'm
right?
listening to this. I'm like, well, thanks, Nick. Yeah, listen, just listen. No numbers, but just I'm ear to the street, folks.
Well, where's the crystal ball? That's what I was going to stick the landing on. Listen, start with the crystal ball, and then you're golden.
And Nick, when you say listen, you mean listen to podcasts, not listen to your employees, right? This is very important for our marketing and monetization.
That's exactly right. Start by listening to the podcast. Next step, listen to the crystal ball, and then come back to the podcast after that. So it's a cyclical
There's got to be
process.
a numeric way of doing this. What are the numbers that you've used as over your long career, Melionas? Why don't you tell people what you've actually done to measure satisfaction?
So let's think about the intentional ways that we can do it. I would say it boils down to one-on-ones and surveys. And so one-on-ones, these should be things that happen with decent regularity. So ideally monthly. If they happen sooner than that or more regular, then fantastic. But the general cadence here is monthly, some one-on-one. You want to make sure that you prepare some questions, and I'll talk about what kind of questions to ask momentarily. And the general theme here is you want to spend most of that one-on-one listening. Ask a question, listen closely, and just understand what it is that you're probing on. The type of things that you want to make sure you're investigating are, does somebody feel productive? Do they feel aligned with the company vision? Do they feel supported with their work? And are they given the right kind of resources to grow? So those are the general themes of questions. During one-on-ones, it's very much listening closely. For surveys, you're asking roughly the same questions and asking people to rate it 1 to 5. And as we know, 1 is saying you don't align with it or don't believe in it, and 5 is something that you strongly agree with. You want to see 4s and 5s. 3 and below is a signal that something's not working. I'll stop there, though. Obviously, this is just a start in terms of things you can be measuring. Ash and Sean, what are we missing here?
Well, I will say, just to be clear to everyone, the base that you're competing against is pretty low. Most companies do not treat their employees very well, and most employees are not super satisfied with the place that they work. So employee satisfaction on a relative basis, if you're getting all 5s and everybody loves what you're doing and nobody has any criticisms, is probably going to be just as unusual as, frankly, doing pretty well across the board.
Yeah, that's only ever happened once, right? FTX.
Oh, I don't know if I could top that. That was actually probably the best joke of the episode. Ash, I will pass the torch of chief joke maker to you for the episode, because you have now reached the peak of the mountain.
This is long overdue, ladies and gentlemen. I would accept this honor with grace, but this is like Michael Caine waiting for an Oscar.
Oh, we're in danger of only answering one question this episode, though. So let's keep going. Nick, what else is on our question queue for today?
All right, let's do it. So, second question that a founder asks is the following: what do you do if employee morale is low? Ash, you want to kick things off?
Sure. So, oftentimes when you've got the whole company's morale low or a team's morale is low, I find that getting everybody together as a group is a good place to start and try and be open about the problems. Now, this allows you to control the conversation to some extent because you're an authority figure in a group setting. Obviously, if it becomes a full-on shouting match and you get defensive, it's going to go very badly. But be humble, be graceful, try and learn about the problems, take questions, and show people that you are both being willing to be transparent and address this issue. Second thing is cleaning house. So oftentimes in periods of bad morale, it can come from one or two people who are maybe instigators for low morale. Maybe they are continually highlighting a problem. Maybe they are constantly getting in the way of a launch. And if you have those kinds of people in the company, they are easy. It's easy for them to influence many other people in the company, and for that bad mindset to go viral. So you've got to get rid of them. And if you are in a money crisis and you're going to do layoffs, then do them in one go, which I know is something Sean talks about a lot. And then last thing is make a plan for success. So everyone acknowledges the problem. We have talked about it as a group. We have cut costs or cleaned house from the people who needed to go. And now we're moving forward, and you've got to have a credible plan that the team can believe in. And then you set owners for the individual goals within that plan. And those goals have one owner. So that person has the excitement and ownership of the responsibility that you're giving them, and that encourages them to do well. And also, you should encourage them to create sub goals for the people that report to them. So again, that feeling of momentum, that feeling of excitement is preserved all the way down to the lower echelons of the team. Sean?
Hey, well, first off, I agree with Ash. So this is a very unusual episode that we're having here, folks. Something might be wrong with the world.
Because you passed the torch. Now you're starting to see me as an authority figure.
Something's going on, but I want to underline something Ash said. It's important to have a plan. You want to give people something to believe in. Having a credible plan is really important because let's be honest, no company has a journey that's so magical and perfect that morale will always be high. There will be points in the history of your company where morale is low. It'll happen more often than you would like. And so what do you do when you're there inevitably? You need a plan for how to get out of it. And that plan has to be credible, like Ash said. You want people to focus on the potential and the positives, not on the problems. And that doesn't mean ignoring them. Being transparent, being honest about the problems is important because if you ignore the problems or you try to cover them up, people will see that will actually lower morale even further if they can't trust you. But as long as you have a credible plan to get out of it, that's all anybody can ask of you. And in fact, being transparent with them puts you ahead of the pack because most companies do try to hide bad news. They do try to cover these things up. So if your team can trust you...
Well, Sean, are there some problems that you can't share, though?
There are, well, obviously, yes. There are going to be problems. For example, you don't typically want to talk about specific employees' behavior in front of your whole team. So you may have problematic employees if you have to fire someone because they were harassing someone else, which, by the way, is a common cause of low morale, is that you have people that are acting in ways that are illegal or at least borderline difficult. You don't want to speak about individual employees and those sorts of things, or else the legal repercussions. But what you can do is you can acknowledge, listen, we've had problems and morale was low for a good reason, but we're addressing them and we're making changes and we're going to be different going forward. You can do those sorts of things. But you're right, there are going to be problems and reason morale is low that you can't talk about.
So even in the cases where you can't talk about the problem in detail, you're still going to acknowledge it exists because everybody already knows, essentially.
Of course, exactly. If you start to try to put on some sort of theater and pretend like everything's great when it's not, everybody sees through that. And then they just start looking for jobs. So let's not go down that path. Let's just deal with it head on. Let's have a credible path. And by the way, the fact that you have a plan, it might not be 100% guaranteed your plan will work. Everybody knows that. There's no such thing as a perfect plan. You just need a credible plan that you're going to pursue to get out of it. And that's really all anybody can ask of you in general. Like, for example, with this podcast, I'm letting Ash tell all the jokes today. That's my plan to get out of this. We'll see if it works. Is it guaranteed? Probably not.
All right. I think we probably got time for one more question before people start growing beards. So, what's an MVP of performance reviews for an early stage company, one that doesn't have a HR team yet? So, what's the MVP for performance reviews when you're early stage, you don't have a HR team yet?
Let me jump in on this one first. So I feel very strongly early stage companies should not have performance reviews. There's a lot of people who come out of large companies. You're used to a performance review every year. It's something that serves a very specific purpose at large companies that you don't need in an early stage company. You're fighting against oblivion. You're fighting to survive. You don't need to worry about going through the motions of what you think companies should do. You need to focus on what's important. At the same time, you do want to make sure your employees feel valued. We've talked about listening to them. That's an important part of them being happy. But you also want to make sure they're growing. And so what I instead recommend early stage companies do is don't do performance reviews, but do focus on employee personal growth. And so a process that I've used in my last few companies is when I say early, you're 1 to 15 employees, you're sub $1 million in revenue. I sit down with everyone and I ask them to come up with a list of 3 things that they think they do very well in their job. Not 3 projects or accomplishments, but 3 skills or capabilities they think that they're great at, and 3 things they want to improve on. And I sit down and I come up with the same list for them, or whoever their manager is comes up with that equivalent list. And then you sit down and you compare the lists together. And comparing those lists is an important exercise because you start to understand the differences between what the employee thinks they're good at and what you perceive them being good at. And that difference is often very informative to the employee. You also see where they want to improve and where you want them to improve. And there's also a lot to be learned in the differences there. And coming away from it as a manager, you have a sense of how this person wants to grow. How can you help them grow? But they also get a chance to understand how they're valued by the organization, what you think that they're amazing at, and also what you need from them in the future. And I have found that this process, while it sounds hokey and is very simple, it really energizes everyone because they feel seen as a person, as a human. And it also gives them a launching board to grow in their career. And I've actually, every time I've done this, all the employees have asked, hey, can we do this every 6 months? Can we do it every 4 months? I want to do this more than just once a year. Typically, performance reviews are once a year. And that's a signal to me that we're really starting to connect and achieving the goal, which is helping people grow at the company. And then later on, when you're a big company, there's time for performance reviews and the reasons you might do that, although it's still problematic. But that's how I would get started. The key thing is to focus on people. The question, of course, I always get is, well, Sean, what about how do I know if people are underperforming? How do I know if people, should be let go? If your company is small, you already know. You don't need to do performance reviews to figure that out. If somebody should be promoted, you already know that too. The thing about a small company is you don't need to do a process to figure these things out. You trust your judgment and you just act on it. It's really, I don't think it's any more complicated than that. But Nick, you tell me, do you disagree?
Well, Sean, hang on a second. I want to just clarify.
No, we're moving on. It's okay. No chance to disagree. I'm clearly correct.
No questions, just statements. So I wanted to know, are you pretty clear cut on anyone who's underperforming just has to be fired? And is that an immediate thing or is there at least like a short timeline?
I think it's a complicated question because underperforming has a lot of different degrees. There's people who underperform against what they could possibly perform at. And there's people that are underperforming their job, meaning they're just not doing their job. If you're an early stage company and somebody is not able to do their job, you should let them go. You don't have time to coach and teach them into it. You have to find somebody who can do it. If somebody is not performing at the level you think that they can perform at, but they're still doing the job, then that's something that's worth investing in and seeing, can you get that person to a higher level? But it's a longer discussion. I don't know if I can capture the nuance here. That's how I would think about it. Overall, I think Ash mentioned at the beginning, the overarching lesson of dealing with your employees, as Ash said, is it's much more expensive to fire someone and hire somebody else than take somebody who's pretty good and make them excellent if you can. But it's also much more expensive to take somebody who is who's really bad and try to make them okay than just go out and hire somebody new.
I'll start here. One of the themes that came from what Sean was describing is that ultimately employees want recognition. they want growth, and they want the company to do well. And so, of course, what that means is you should, if you're going to be designing processes around that, you want to make sure that is facilitating those three things. And so taking that back to the nucleus of this question, we're talking about an MVP of performance reviews. And so what's the simplest, fastest way to start just understanding, is somebody producing? And for me, what we've always done is just provide a great process for people to document what they do and have it be clear how it ties back into moving the needle forward for the startup. And so the MVP would be a combination of monthly one-on-ones. And then we also do weekly status updates. These are not updates that are based off of specifically performance criteria. The general theme here is, what's a major obstacle that you are working towards to address for the company? And did you make progress towards that? Because ultimately that's where growth comes. That's where great moments of recognition comes. And that's what leads to the company doing well. And so find ways to make sure that people's performance actually aligns with solving something important for the company. And then just find a nice way to document it, whether it be through a weekly status update, a monthly process where they reflect on what people contributed to for the company. If you just have a nice way to make sure you're tracking progress on those key things, number one, it becomes easier to understand progress. And then number two, generally speaking, it just builds in a nice process to make sure you're fully aligned on people tackling the right obstacles for your company.
So Ash and Nick, this whole discussion brings up an interesting question that wasn't asked by an external founder, but I think is I'd love to hear what you guys think, which is, at the end of the day, do great companies make employees happy, or do happy employees make great companies? So are employees bringing happiness with them, or is it the company that's making them happy?
Oh, I have a controversial answer. Most of the companies that I have worked at or been an investor in where they've seen incredible growth, I wouldn't say the company's employees are happy. I think they are excited, and I think they are working their butts off. Whether or not that equals happiness is up for debate.
It's a great question. I love the way Ash is looking at it, because I have no idea. I would say ultimately...
But you are honest, which I appreciate and respect.
That's right. Exactly. I'd say this. People love to work on something that's making an impact. And so if the company continues to excel, that's rewarding and can be a huge contributor of happiness. And so working on the right things and actually achieving those successes should be something that contributes meaningfully to a rewarding, happy work culture.
But Ash makes a good point. That's a good point to end this episode on. I use the word happiness. I probably shouldn't have. Satisfaction is a much better way to think about it, because you can't make people happy, but you can make your employees satisfied. And satisfaction might mean they're excited, they're working hard, they're being productive. Happiness is multi-rooted, involves your personal life, your professional life, and you never as a leader want to take on the happiness of people who work for you, because you just don't control it. So maybe that's a good way to frame everything we've talked about here. We're all humans, we're complicated. Happiness is a complicated word. So there you go. We've covered a lot of questions, a lot of ground we didn't expect, talking about employees, how to understand if they're satisfied, what is happiness, what's the meaning of life, is anything in this great void of a universe worthwhile? We covered it all in the last few minutes. So as always, Ash and Nick, thanks for the awesome answers. It was a lot of fun.
Absolute blast. These are some great ones. Yeah.
It's been emotional.
And we will be back in the future with more episodes in which I will take back the torch of telling jokes from Ash. So don't worry.
Doubtful.
If you have questions you'd like us to answer in those episodes, please ask on our website, thestartuphelpdesk.com, or ask us on Twitter at thestartuphd. If you ask questions, we'll have more episodes, and we really want to have more episodes because we have quite a lot of fun doing this show. So in the meantime, the Startup Help Desk is closed. We will be back. Good luck in building your business.